gosh, it's gonna work. It
Oh,
works!
ho, ho, ho! Oh, you are my hero. All heroes don't wear capes. Timothy Adams, folks.
And Daniel Dvoress took it down, winning almost $300,000 for first. Daniel, congratulations.
The River's the king of spades, wire to wire, and a dominant performance from Stephen Chidwick.
We have Doug coming in for a min raise. Under the gun 7. The average is 43 BB. So Doug's right around average. Dan Smith has a spot that's quite interesting. He is low jack off of 28 BB with pocket 9s. So this is a pretty awkward spot, especially with ICM effects. Like if you study an ICM solve in this spot, it may have limited flatting or no flatting EP versus EP. And you might even see folds from like 8s or 9s. So we've talked about it throughout the course. Why would that be? A lot of it has to do with the ICM limitations. In my opinion, ICM is going to overestimate the pressure on Dan right now. It's going to overvalue medium stack survival. We know the ICM outputs put a premium on winning without showdown, leveraging fold equity, ending the hand straight away. So it suggests that this 3-better fold strategy is more of like a prudent way to secure or increase our ICM value instead of seeing flops, turns, and rivers. The shape of the response turns into this 3-better fold approach, like this pre-flop game of chicken, which can feel really unintuitive when you're dealt something in between like pocket 9s. So we can kind of ask ourselves as Dan when we should or when do we want to deviate away from the outputs? Why should we think about incorporating flats? Number one, we would ask ourselves, do we have real pressure on us? Let's think of the variables. There's 22 left. There's tiny pay jumps, which we've talked about a lot at this stage. Dan is 1.5 times below average. So we can kind of come to the conclusion that there's not that much pressure on Dan. And then number two, we can kind of ask ourselves, does flatting perform better versus humans than a computer? I think yes. With the computer outputs, I think there would be some aggressive actions behind that human players may not find. And when you do go post-flop with Doug in this position, hands that I'm thinking of are like ace queen suited, ace jack suited, king queen suited, 8s, 9s, maybe 10s. All those combos feel really awkward to 3-bet in the initial node. For those reasons, as Dan, I like having flats here with the defined range. When actual pressure rises, like a final table bubble or at the final table, I would revert to kind of a 3-bet or fold approach. What are you thinking?
Articulated it really well. Kind of an awkward spot. If we were a little shorter and more comfortable shoving some hands, I'd be happier without a calling range. But if we were a bit deeper, then I think it's very clear that we want to have calls. And this is kind of the very thresholdy spot where, like you said, the ICM solution is probably going to tell you don't flat or flat very rarely. But I think we can adjust from that a little bit. Almost pretend like there's more people left, for example.
Right.
That would kind of shift things in the direction that we would expect to see.
Yeah, it's a really tricky spot. Looks like Dan's just counting his stack because that's how precise it is. Like you just talked about, he's kind of right in between with his stack. He does 3-bet to 5.5, just under 5.5 blinds. So yeah, I can understand why he did choose that option. Now it's O'Brien cut off with queens. I think he has only one decision, and that's to stick it in. His hand is far too good, so not all that interesting. Brian does go with it. Back to Doug. I think Doug's hand is just too good. Probably going to go with it as well. It's not that straightforward of a spot. It's obviously a very unique spot. A lot of action behind him, of course. But yeah, ace king suited is too strong. He does go with it. So we expected that. And now Dan's got a clear fold, obviously. He's disgusted. He's making it seem like he folded something really big. And a 9 in the window. River's an ace. So yeah, Doug wins a huge pot and Brian's eliminated. We have Bryn opening hijack off of roughly 30 with king 10 off. Seems good and normal. He has good cards not to get played back at. We have Eibinger in the small blind with deuces off of 15. So yeah, like what are your first thoughts about this jam? Like, do you have much of an opinion? Like seems whatever, neutral it?
Yeah, kind of whatever, pretty close. Would be very comfortable with it against the cutoff, and first the low jack, I think I would be probably folding. It's one that can go either way based on what do you think, Bryn?
Right.
Is opening.
Right. An equilibrium, it's probably neutral-ish, I would imagine. And then you base it off of where that shifts, right? And a lot of that has to do with stack configuration. What kind of range in his opening. I think he's going to be opening relatively linear. Like, he's not that deep himself, but the stacks he's opening into are fairly deep, like excluding Matthias, obviously. Yeah, I think Matthias just does a kind of a good job of attacking a relatively linear range, and this might just like overperform. So yeah, I like it. Obviously, Matthias is like probably one of the best shallow stack players in the world. He knows all these spots like super well. Okay, so we're gonna hide Matthias's hand here. We see Shulman come in for a raise on the cutoff with king six suited. Looks good. Not gonna know Matthias's hand until after the hand plays out. He jams like 15 seconds. I mean, he jams the deuces like at the same speed. He jams for just under 20. Doug is in the small blind with eights. So what are your kind of initial thoughts? I guess first we can ask ourselves, what does Matthias's rough range look like?
Yeah, I think the lowest pairs are again close, and probably I would be folding maybe threes also. He's gonna have obviously ace king through ace jack, ace 10 feels close-ish. Could kind of go either way with that one. King queen seems like it's gonna be probably in there. And then he's gonna go for a non all-in 3-bet with his highest pairs and best suited hands also. Like ace king through probably ace jack suited, maybe I would say was,
And then like jacks, deuce, right?
yeah,
Hands
like
jam.
that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yep. So we're gonna be shoving a lot of suited broadways.
All the suited broadways, right? You'd think? Yeah.
All the suited
And-
broadways, I would say.
And then what about something like ace 8 suited, ace 9 suited? Those can kind of go in between jamming or 3-bet fold. Again, it depends on all these factors, but we're just talking straight up equilibrium.
Yeah. Maybe even flat those. I mean, those
Yeah.
seem like kind of close, all three options.
With that said, Doug's rough range, like if you have ace queen off, it just does too well versus the jams you just described. Ace queen suited, nines all seem like too good, but ace jack suited and eights, is that
Right around
right?
there, yeah.
Yeah, right around there.
It's a big issue, obviously, the depths of the three
Yeah.
layers.
Right.
Matthias is putting in 19 big blinds, but if Doug wants to VPip, he has to run the risk of the opener jamming and forcing him to either fold out a lot of equity or just put in a ton of money, which he doesn't really want to do. So that's a pretty significant factor that is going to be a benefit for Matthias shoving a bit wider and a detriment for Doug with the fringy hands.
As Doug, I guess we can ask ourselves, when we're breaking this down, we would think of the equilibrium range, and then we would think of factors that may shift us to play tighter as Doug. So first is Eibinger finding the right jams. That's always the first thing we're going to ask. Is he jamming around equilibrium, or is he jamming looser or tighter? We kind of just talked about how Eibinger is one of the best shallow stack players in the world, so he's going to be shoving the appropriate range. He's not going to be overly tight. So we can kind of already determine that we don't have to make any drastic adjustments. I guess it's like one of these things where, as Doug, you always have to ask yourself what's the upside of winning versus the downside of losing, which we should obviously always do. Like, he's in a really good spot right now. As the final table approaches, that's one thing the model is not going to account for, right? His future game is really sweet as the pressure increases on the average stacks and like some of the shorter stacks, right? Would you agree that for that reason, especially, like, we go a little tighter than what we see at ICM solution suggests?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important, like you said, to try and have a rough idea of where the thresholds are first before you do that. So you're not just going, oh, future game, I'm going to fold tens or whatever.
Right.
But once you identify that, okay, it feels very close at equilibrium, then you can give yourself a bit more leeway to use the other factors to sway your decision.
So yeah, we're both coming to the conclusion that you want to fold eights. Am I understanding that right? Because that's where I'm at.
I think I would lean fold, yeah, but I think it's very close. I would
It's very
for
close.
for going with it.
Doug doesn't play a lot of tournaments. I know that. So he must just be like, I mean, his intuition is going to be very good. Obviously, he's an excellent poker player. But yeah, this would be a spot where I would also be just not completely sure. He does fold relatively fast, which I think is really sharp. Yeah, like I said, I know Doug doesn't play that many tournaments, so pretty good for like a heads up cash game specialist. So yeah, very interesting. And we see Eibinger did have nines. Results wise, very good fold by Doug.
What is the flop going to be?
Good point. We have 20 left, raising first in on the low jack. Folds to Doug on the button, who slightly covers with ace jack off. Could go either way. I think I would have a preference to flat this one and not 3-bet much at all, but I think it's completely fine. Right away, Doug goes to 300K, so to 6 blinds. Initial thoughts on his sizing. My initial thought is it's a bit on the small side for you guys being this deep, but maybe not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I think that ties into you saying that you would have a preference to flat this hand and not have a very large 3-bet range. That kind of lends itself to having a bigger size and being more polar. And what we're probably just seeing here is he's kind of choosing a different overall strategy and 3-betting a bit more often for a smaller size.
Right. Well said. So I guess you don't feel obviously like you have any decision other than to call. What about your smaller pairs?
Shove, not the right hand to 4-bet small, and I'm not going to fold
Yeah, exactly.
to the 300k.
876 Rainbow. You are not auto checking, which we were talking about earlier about people checking really fast. You're obviously thinking about what your options are, and you always should. You come out for a lead.
It's the kind of board that you see a lot of leading on in this kind of spot. 3-bet pot out of position. We have a ton of these mid-pocket pairs in our range. And then, especially with ICM, his 3-bet range kind of gets shifted a bit more towards the higher offsuit hands and a bit less towards the kind of board coveragey suited stuff. So yeah, I think it's just a flop that benefits me quite a lot and allows me to target a lot of his hands like he has. A lot of natural bluffs with the 2 overcards back to flush draw, especially ones that have a 10 in them, but even just a random king jack of diamonds or whatever I think would be fine to lead. Obviously doesn't need to work very often.
Exactly. Yeah, looks good. And well said. Obviously, Doug has no decision, but still somewhat interesting.
On you, Ike. Wake up.
Again, what a phenomenal lineup we have.
This was such a fun tournament.
Yeah. So many great players.
It's always a treat to play one with a bit deeper stacks.
So yeah, Nick thinks he doesn't have the right properties to open. 7-5 suited, looks good. Now it's on Doug. So Dan is just over 20 blinds.
These are really complicated spots. The small blind first in with, 15 to 25 big blinds.
Yeah, I would just try to study these spots religiously, understand what the equilibrium looks like, and then really kind of know which shifts I'm interested in making depending on the variables. So depending on the amount of pressure or what range I'm up against, like is it equilibrium range or is it a range that is slightly tweaked because of the way my opponent maybe approaches the spot? This is something I would be kind of obsessively studying over. Obviously right away, Dan has a very close spot. Like, can we kind of ballpark what we want to call for 20 blinds in the situation, given the stage of the tournament?
This is going to be pretty thresholdy.
Yeah, I like thinking of my offsuit aces and then my suited aces. Ace 6 off seems close. Ace 4 suited type of thing. And then something like king queen off suited broadways will probably make it in there. All of them at equilibrium. This just isn't that high pressure of a spot. For pairs, 4s seems neutral-ish, and I would never fold 5s. I think that's a rough ballpark. Of course, we have some risk premium, but it's like 5%. So that's the additional equity we need to call compared to chips, since, 2 stacks are all in.
What makes you have such a big difference between your A6 and your King X? You say King Queen, but A6 offsuit.
Just being able to win the all-in without making a pair, right?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. The shove is, in theory, not a huge range, right?
Yeah.
It's going to have a lot of bad A6 in particular. So as soon as you drop to the king highs, you lose a lot.
What are some like other upsides for Dan? This is like a relatively big shove. So if Dan does win, he's going to be roughly around average. So he's gambling for quite a bit of chips. Basically, Doug should have a bunch of like offsuit middle-in cards and suited middle-in cards. Or he should have some like 10-9 off, queen 5 suited, and this stuff that we're doing really well against. So I think if you're Dan, the one thing that kind of sticks out to me, and I'm nitpicking a bit, but I don't think king 10 off is a jam at equilibrium. I don't think it accomplishes enough. I think a hand like king 10 off wants to limp or just have like a raise first in. My fear is Doug maybe jamming on the strong side, and he may be missing some of the hands that we do really well against, like the 10-9 offs, queen 5 suited type of stuff. I think that just makes it a lot closer.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's these small blind spots, like I alluded to earlier, they're so nuanced. They can shift so much based on exactly the stage of the tournament and the 2 stacks involved and exactly how many big blinds and all these things. And if you're going to play just like in a very intuitive way, the tendency is always going to be shoving too strong. Kind of unintuitive, some of the shoves that you're supposed to make with some seemingly pretty weak middling cards that obviously they're in there because they make Dan's decision more difficult with hands like this, but it's easy to miss them, I would say, unless you're very experienced and very studied with these very nuanced spots.
This is like such a tough spot. Like when I saw it for Dan,
Yeah, it's really tough. I think another thing that's going to play into the decision is just the remaining field in general. Like you said, it's one of the toughest tables that you'll see. It's not like you're going to have a lot of slam dunk spots to accumulate chips. If we are close to the field redraw and there are some soft spots on other tables, that would push me more towards being a bit more conservative and try and hang on to my stack and seeing how things develop after the redraw. But if we're likely to be in this setup for a while, and especially with the final table approaching, having one of these kind of middling stacks, it's going to be tough as the risk premium increases to find spots to accumulate and get to the place where you want to be, which is having a stack that can overperform versus what the models say. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion either way.
And I think that's a really sharp point about the redraw that I think a lot of top level players are considering. Really well said. And I'm with you. And Dan, you can clearly see he knows it's a call at equilibrium, and then he's factoring all the things that you kind of alluded to. I just always laugh at Dan. He's so funny. I love playing with certain characters at the table because they're just fun to observe.
He's used a couple time banks already.
Yeah, exactly. Again, just pointing out how difficult of a spot it is. He ends up calling, and then he's probably like, fuck.
Yeah, he's not happy to see that one, of course.
Yeah, he's just not. Yeah, exactly. He's just not happy to see that. Exactly that hand. Obviously, it's dominating him, but it's just kind of making Dan think the things that he may have been considering, like, is Doug just jamming a little on the strong side here?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Dan Smith has had a couple really tricky spots, and that's how it goes sometimes. You're just dealt really tricky situations, and yeah.
GG.
GG to Dan Smith, legendary player. So we're down to 17. We have an average of 44 big blinds. We are going to hide Nacho's hand, so it's not going to be revealed. He's on the button with 18 blinds. He comes in for a min raise. Mr. Paul is in the small blind. He is sub 20 and folds. And now it is on Tobias in the big blind with King 8 suited and just under 15 blinds. So he has 14 and a half. Let's talk about Nacho's button strategy. Nacho is obviously going to be fairly polar here to raise first in. He's going to have a fair amount of open jams. Those open jams are usually going to be our middling stuff, maybe fringy to raise call or raise fold, hands that can sometimes get better to fold by open jamming, and hands that fold out combos that would have pretty good equity versus us. That's going to affect, obviously, Tobias's decision because the button strategy is going to have a completely different range than it would be if it didn't have open jams. So Tobias goes for the jam. For me, this is kind of indicating Tobias is deviating from equilibrium. I think suited kings do jam, but it's usually the lower ones. So I would be under the assumption that Tobias is node locking Nacho on the fly here, thinking his range might be a little wonky. Do you have initial thoughts about the jam from Tobias?
The way I usually think about it is having the King X with the kicker being underneath the offsuit combos that open from the opponent. So if we think that Nacho folds the offsuit 8s and his raise folds are going to come from the offsuit 9s, Jack 9, Queen 9 type hands, then the King 8 might be a nice choice. I think I would prefer a slightly lower kicker with the King X. But like you said, it can change a lot based on what he thinks Nacho's range is, and specifically what he thinks Nacho's doing with the middle part of his range. With King 8, I think I would prefer to call and just play pots against maybe some suited Ace X that I dominate and some King X that I dominate. Maybe choose some more Ace X that has better blocker effects versus his raise folds.
Yeah, the King 8, like the first thing that stands out to me is I think Tobias is in the right direction, that he should potentially play this spot a little more aggressive than the equilibrium solution. My initial thought would be, yeah, Nacho might be a little looser on the button than what the equilibrium solution looks like. I think Tobias is sharp and he is attacking Nacho's button open. I would think that King 8, my default would be to slot it into the call line, because if I was to assume Nacho to be slightly looser to raise first in, I'm thinking hands like Queen 8 off, Jack 8 off, 10 8 off. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yes, we are jamming King 6 suited, let's say, at equilibrium. The mechanic would be to tailor our kings down. So King 3 suited, King 6, King 5, King 4, King 3, King 2, if you want to really attack that button range. And King 8 just has really good playability versus what we assume to be an expanded button range from Nacho.
Especially when Nacho's low pocket pairs are just going to be shoving himself, so you don't have the upside with the King 8 of having 2 overcards versus pocket 5s that you're going to get called by if you shove, which would be the case if it was, some deeper stacks and the King 8 and the King 3 kind of perform a bit closer versus this more polar range.
That's a really good point. Nacho does snap call top part of his range. He had ace king. So what do we know? Nacho might just be playing very tight in this spot. Kind of kidding. But again, like a lot of our comments, we're assuming a lot of things, right? So we're not pretending like this is how Nacho's playing this spot. That's what poker is putting incomplete information together to try to make sense of what the best play is. Tobias is eliminated. Another really strong player eliminated. Tobias has really strong fundamentals and he has good execution. So GG to him. 2 tables left. 16 players remain. Where is your head at this stage?
When it redraws 2 tables, I'm kind of trying to come up with a overall game plan. I'm kind of just taking stock of who's at my table, how the chips are positioned at the table, where my kind of opportunities might lie, and then having a general game plan of how I'm going to approach the situation.
Yeah, it's a good point about obviously 2 tables of 8, and you're going to be playing with the same opponents more or less before the final table. So right away, I have 4s under the gun 8. I think this is a clear fold. We've talked about this a lot in the course. You definitely want to be blocker oriented to generate folds behind you. The pocket pairs, suited connectors, those kind of hands go way down in value. Similar thing for Eibinger here. Obviously, he's going to fold the deuces.
A good time to play thoughtfully and very cognizant of where all the stacks are, like I said. Make sure you know how many chips everyone has, especially a situation like this with Webster on 4 big blinds, making sure you're adjusting for that and just kind of slowing down.
Yeah, exactly. At this stage, when there's 2 tables left, it almost feels like it's just another stage. Early in my career, I may have struggled too much with like, you're getting a little anxious, you're kind of close to the final table, it's getting more serious, and you're too overwhelmed by potentially fear and anticipation instead of just being like, these are the new variables.
Yeah, so much going on.
We have Webster on just over 3.5 blinds. Obviously, he picks up a very straightforward jam. Nick obviously has a very straightforward call. But it should be like at least discuss that if you look at an ICM solve, the ICM solve's not going to account for future hands with ICM MTT, right? But this is like one of those spots where, yeah, you just don't want to really follow the solution because, of course, if Webster folds, he's going to get a free orbit, right? So he's not going to have to pay any money because of big blind ante. So he's definitely going to shave off 10, 15% or whatever hands. Just because those future hands go really well for him, right? On a micro stack, he's going to be able to try to wait for a good hand, but there's going to be dead money in the pot. He's going to give himself a chance to potentially triple up. He gets to realize his equity really easily, right? Because he has 3.5 blinds. So he either has a good hand or he doesn't, and he just puts it in.
Some chance of a small pay jump also. And then conversely, from in Nick's shoes, he kind of has the opposite effect where he's incentivized to get Webster out of there. Having a very short stack on your immediate right is going to negatively impact your future game because they're going to be shoving and you're going to have to make a decision against that with players behind. So
right. Yeah, he's already thinking of future hands if he makes that adjustment. So we see Webster double. Webster picks up a great hand on the button. And I have kings. These festivals, they're such an endurance test. It's can you show up for 12 days straight and play close to your A game? Of course, there'll be moments when he may not, but it really is an endurance test. So yeah, looks like Webster doubles again. I just kind of wanted to know, like, just all the things that we're talking about. 2 tables left. There's just a lot of things going on. The tournament feels more serious. It's very easy to start feeling like there's a dark cloud coming over you all of a sudden. Like you're in the tournament, things are going well, and then there's a new phase of the tournament. There's different energy, and all of a sudden something like kind of like unfortunate to you happens, and it's very easy to start having like negative energy. Do you want to touch on that? Because you're pretty grounded when you play.
yeah, I guess it's something that I've obviously thought about a lot. There's not one tool that's going to work for everyone, but having had a consistent meditation practice for a long time, I find I can fairly consistently reset myself with just a few mindful breaths. Another thing that's hard to do in the moment, maybe if it's a very high stress situation or something that you haven't practiced, but just noticing where your thoughts go. For example, right here, I think a natural thought that's easy to have is count how much you would have had if you won the pot and have a bit of kind of self-pity or maybe remembering a different tournament where you also got unlucky people. These thoughts are going to pop up. The advantage of being mindful is being able to notice thoughts earlier and being able to just reframe that thought, recognize that it's not helpful, and focus your attention on something that is helpful. So now, as soon as I notice myself thinking about how many chips I would have had if I won, I can kind of change that course of action and just count how many chips do I have now. Just go back to the game plan, to thinking strategically and treating every hand in a vacuum.
It's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. You just have to come to the conclusion, quicker the better, that tournaments are just so dynamic and chips just are going to be moving and you're not going to win every all in and some pots are going to go wrong. But just treating it like what it is, which is a strategy game, sometimes that's easy to say.
I also like to see it as an opportunity. Part of the reframing is that it's almost a game within the game. Everyone's going to have stretches where they run very well, have stretches where they run poorly. And to a large extent, I think how you play when you are running poorly or things aren't going your way, that's a much bigger variable between players, right? The difficulty mode is cranked up on that, but that gives you a really big opportunity to separate yourself from other players if you can handle that situation better than they can. So I think approaching it with that opportunity mindset is a good way to maybe snap yourself out of that and get back to the task in hand.
Making poker overly emotional, you use a lot of your mental resources on things that are, number one, out of your control, but are just going to kind of compound day by day. The best players can handle that well. And when we talk about mindset, it's just such a massive thing.